Hello, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Here's what we're looking at. Our Spotlight Politics team on President Biden's whirlwind day in Chicago and his pick for the area's next U.S. attorney.
A WTTW News exclusive on an effort to clear the backlog of police misconduct cases. We hear from the head of the agency charged with investigating.
It has been a scary time to either be a trans person or to be providing care to trans people.
Unionization efforts from one of the largest LGBTQ healthcare providers.
Happ drives one in the air, pretty well hit.
And Cubs outfielder Ian Happ teams up with an artist to capture the view from the field.
Now to some of today's top stories. President Joe Biden spent the day in Chicago today. The president arrived at O'Hare this morning and touted his economic plan at the old Main Post Office building downtown. Among other things, the president talked about the federal infrastructure bill, which is set to deposit $1 billion into high-speed broadband internet service for residents across Illinois that lack access. Biden says it's all part of a plan to rebuild the nation's economy from the middle out, an approach he calls Bidenomics.
Under Bidenomics, we've already had over $490 billion in private investment commitments. $490 billion from U.S. companies and companies around the world coming to the United States of America.
Biden was also in town to attend a fundraiser at the JW Marriott hosted by Governor Pritzker, and according to Crane Chicago Business, that fundraiser netted him north of $1 million for his campaign.
The Chicago area is set to get a new U.S. attorney to replace former U.S. Attorney John Lausch. President Biden today announces April Perry as his nominee to take over as the region's top federal prosecutor. Perry is a former ethics officer at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, but she resigned after the Jussie Smollett case and subsequent investigation. She currently serves as senior counsel at GE Healthcare. If confirmed by the U.S. Senate, Perry would be the first woman in this role.
The Chicago Police Department's search warrant files are incomplete and paper-based, making the department unable to effectively track so-called wrong raids. That's according to a report from the city's Inspector General. Deborah Witzberg says the wrongful raid on the home of Anjanette Young, seen here, shows the deep problems in CPD's search warrant policies and practices. CPD's draft revisions to its search warrant policy are still open for public comments.
Chicago Board of Education President Miguel Del Valle says he's stepping down this week as his term comes to an end. The former Chicago City Clerk and state senator has served in the position since 2019 when former Mayor Lori Lightfoot appointed him. Current Mayor Brandon Johnson today thanked Del Valle for his service. Meanwhile, Johnson is weighing his own picks for the school board. First school board elections are late next year.
Chicago officials say they're ready for the 1-2 punch of both a long holiday weekend and a NASCAR race expected to bring thousands of people downtown. Interim Police Superintendent Fred Waller says his department is canceling regular days off for officers.
That resources in our neighborhoods will not be affected by large events happening downtown and elsewhere. Residents will see an increased presence with more officers on foot patrols and bike patrols in our downtown areas.
NASCAR says the race will be staffed by nearly 900 private security guards. City fire officials say ambulances will be stationed around the race and teams will be able to stop the racing to access any fire emergencies in nearby buildings. And the city says the haze from Canadian wildfires should be cleared by the time racing starts, but officials can implement additional measures if Chicago's poor air quality remains.
But in the meantime, that smoke is hanging around. For the second straight day, Chicago's air quality is rated as very unhealthy. An updated air quality alert is in effect until midnight on Thursday. City officials recommend avoiding outdoor activities, and if you do go outside, keep it short. Wear an appropriate mask.
Absolutely. Hopefully this lifts in the next
Hopefully
couple of
soon.
days.
No one likes it.
No, not at all. All right, coming up in the program, baseball and art merge in a new partnership.
But first, an effort to clear the backlog of police misconduct cases, a WTTW News exclusive right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
The Civilian Office of Police Accountability investigates all allegations of police misconduct, from police-involved shootings to harassment. And hundreds of these probes have been on the back burner for a long time, but COPA says it is high time to speed the process up. The agency says to WTTW News today it is preparing to clear about 800 cases that have been clogging up the system. COPA says it's an effort to tackle that massive backlog and redirect focus on concluding the most serious cases of alleged misconduct. And joining us now with more is Andrea Kirsten, Chief Administrator of COPA. Welcome back to Chicago tonight. Good to have you here. So you told our Heather Sharon with WTTW News that you're going to review around 800 complaints here, and you're going to perhaps consider closing them as an effort to kind of speed this process up. How come?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, thanks for having me. But to focus really on sort of the evolution of our agency, when we launched back in 2017, there were several, lagging criticisms of the prior iteration before us, that of lack of integrity, lack of independence, lack of transparency, and lack of timeliness. We've done tremendous work as an agency to address the majority of those criticisms. What remains really is our ability to deliver timely investigations. And so we spent the last part of this year, basically 6 months or so, really looking at what happens specifically in the arbitration process after we conclude an investigation and our disciplinary recommendations move forward. And it's lessons that we learned in partnership with the Department of Law and CPD, as well as our own internal legal department, that are really informing this drive to sort of evaluate the posture of some of these older cases.
All right, so you mentioned the arbitration process, because you come up with a recommendation, say, this police officer should be fired and found guilty for what they did, and a lot of times they arbitrate and that doesn't happen. So I take it that some of these 800 cases, you're looking at it and you're saying, you know what, in the arbitration process, they're probably going to survive it either way.
Well, exactly. What we are looking at is what are the factors that contribute to lack of success in an arbitration, and timeliness is one of the biggest factors. And so really when trying to evaluate what is timely in the minds of an arbitrator, we really have to be concluding investigations in 2 years or less in order to have a higher success rate at an arbitration. So that's why we're taking what is approximately 800 cases that are over 2 years old in our agency. And keep in mind, we have just around 1,400 open cases right now total, which is down significantly from where it was when I took over as chief administrator, and something that we're proud of. Progress is being made, but we need to evaluate the use of our resources now to try to course correct going forward.
Are you worried about some of those 800 cases perhaps being cases that you might find some kind of culpability, and that sending a message to police officers that they're going to get away with alleged misconduct?
Sure, and likewise sending a message potentially to impacted parties, complainants who trusted us with their experiences. What I think is important about this program, perhaps more than anything we've discussed, is what kinds of cases won't be considered for this kind of closure. So this closure wouldn't be looking at any officer-involved shooting, any excessive force causing significant injury. We won't be evaluating domestic violence allegations, sexual misconduct allegations, egregious civil rights violations, egregious bias-based verbal abuse. This is really looking at more of our low-level operational violations. Typically, those look like failure to activate body-worn camera in a timely manner, sometimes failure to properly document a police encounter. And again, looking at cases not where that was done intentionally by an officer or having been done repeatedly by an officer, but what is truly perhaps a mistake and something where training or a non-disciplinary recommendation may in fact be the most appropriate resolution.
And again, just to give viewers a sense of the scope of your office,
Sure.
You've looked at some of these big heater cases like Anthony Alvarez, the Adam Toledo shooting. These are the kinds of things that you're reviewing that kind of make a lot of news. How long does it take typically to adjudicate one of those big heater cases, like an officer-involved shooting?
A number of factors can control that. The part that we have control over is obviously how long it takes our investigation and our recommendations to be issued. And so right now, on average, our investigations are concluding in just under 2 years, but we need that average to be across the board for all of these cases. We're able to deliver on a timeline for a high-profile case and close something in a matter of months or under a year, but that has to be the norm for all of the complaints that we receive.
And as you mentioned, you do your review, you come out with your recommendation, and a lot of times, with help from the police union, that officer might arbitrate and then keep their job. Or the police superintendent might say, you know what, we disagree with COPA's findings, we're not going to go forward with that recommendation. Does that get frustrating?
Well, I think ultimately this is a system of due process, right? And so it isn't just one recommendation or one voice that controls the outcome. These are systems of judicial due process that essentially govern the way that we hold officers and any other kind of employee responsible for misconduct on the job. So while it can be frustrating to see your work not be successful, ultimately this is the system that we participate in.
And going back many years, I mean, COPA replaced IPRA in the wake of the Laquan McDonald shooting. That agency was kind of wiped away. Do you feel like you have the resources to do what you need to do? All the investigators, all the researchers, everybody.
Yes, I think we have significant resources, and we've continued to build those resources over time. But right-sizing our caseload through this initiative, I think, will be able to help us evaluate meaningfully going forward whether we have sustainable amounts of staffing to deliver on a timeline like we hope to and anticipate.
All right,
in the future.
we are at a time. We should mention that a lot of change. This new Community Commission of Police Oversight is going forward. Going to have control over your office. They will pick the person in your position.
Yes.
Going forward. So a lot of stuff happening with police oversight. Andrea Kirsten, thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
And you can read Heather Sharon's full story on this on our website. And up next, how the fight for LGBTQ and labor rights intersect in Chicago. So please stay with us.
Workers in management at one of the nation's largest LGBTQ organizations are negotiating their first union contract. At the table since November, both sides say they're eager to come to a resolution. They agree that access to LGBTQ healthcare is more important than ever, as such care is shrinking in surrounding states. Producer Blair Paddock and reporter Nick Blumberg bring us the story.
Allie Garback says she's felt empty since she was laid off 6 months ago. She worked for the now-defunct In Power program with Howard Brown Health. It provided specialized services for queer people facing violence.
The hardest part about it is just not even just being laid off, but knowing that the program just doesn't exist anymore, and there's not another program like it. And the Venn diagram of queer people and people that have experienced violence is a circle.
Garback is one of the 61 Howard Brown Health workers who were laid off in January. And getting those 61 workers back on the job has been part of the fight for Howard Brown Workers United. They're currently negotiating their first contract. Katie Mitos is Vice President of External Relations with Howard Brown Health. They say the layoffs were due to a $12 million budget gap.
It came from pharmacy revenue, which is a program called 340B. 340B has changed significantly over the last few years, and it's hard to kind of pinpoint the moment that it changed because it's in the judicial branch. Judges are making decisions about 340B. It's also in the legislative branch, and pharmaceutical corporations are also making changes. So it's kind of a three-prong approach that they're taking to pull back some of the savings.
More protections for trans workers and patients is what Andrea Villanueva, a bargaining committee member for the union, would like to see in the new contract.
It has been a scary time to either be a trans person or to be providing care to trans people.
20 states have passed laws or policies banning gender-affirming care for youth. That's according to the Human Rights Campaign. Howard Brown says it saw an increase of 5,000 patients last year, 5% of them being out-of-state patients seeking gender-affirming care. Alethea Zamantakis, a sociologist at Northwestern University, believes these attacks make unionizing an even larger priority for workers.
Unionizing really offers the queer liberation movement a possibility to win the demands that we are fighting for in the streets.
And LGBTQ and labor rights have intersected since the dawn of Pride.
Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, two trans women of color who fought at the Stonewall riots that gave birth to the LGBT movement. We're fighting because Black and brown and poor, queer and trans people were living on the streets. We're having to engage in sex work to survive. We're unable to find employment.
Howard Brown workers are currently accusing management of negotiating in bad faith, a charge they say is in front of the National Labor Relations Board. In response, Mitos says management is, in fact, engaging in good faith bargaining.
We want to get to a contract as quickly as possible, and one that benefits both sides of the organization. And we believe that we are better together.
While it's unclear whether Garback will be getting their job back, they're staying positive.
I don't think I'm hopeful that Empower is going to come back. I think they kind of kaput that program, but I am hopeful that at least the Labor Board will recognize that some injustices have happened.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
Workers and management are set to meet at the bargaining table again on Friday. President Joe Biden makes a whirlwind trip to Chicago and nominates the first woman as the area's top federal prosecutor if confirmed. All that and more in Spotlight Politics. Who's here? Heather Sharon, Amanda Vinicky, and Paris Schutz. So President Biden in Chicago today announcing that April Perry is his pick for the U.S. attorney here. Perry worked as a federal prosecutor in the office. Paris, she also served as the chief ethics officer in Cook County State's Attorney's Office with Kim Foxx, but she left Fox's administration dismissing charges, or after the Fox administration dismissed those charges against Empire actor Jussie Smollett. Tell us more about April Perry and that decision.
Perry, as you mentioned, a longtime prosecutor, most notably in the U.S. Attorney's Office prosecuting the Kevin Trudeau pitchman case. And then, as you mentioned, by the way, we should mention she served on the Chicago Police Board for many years, kind of like a similar resume to Lori Lightfoot, who was also considered a name that was going to be U.S. Attorney before she ever ran for mayor. And then, as you mentioned, as the chief ethics officer there at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office under Kim Foxx, leaving amid that whole cloud regarding the Jussie Smollett case and all those questions that were unanswered. As far as we've gleaned, Dan Webb did this big, investigation into what went wrong there, who was wrong, who acted unethically. Her name's not really mentioned in any of that, and we don't know this for sure, but it seems like she left before that really blew up, and perhaps in protest of what she saw happening there, as opposed to being part of that. I would assume that if she had a different role in that, she wouldn't get the high praise that she's getting from the senators here and the search process that found her. So obviously very deep resume, as you would want in someone that's going to take over this very important job.
President Biden also fundraising here today, as we mentioned earlier, with the governor, some other deep pocket donors. Amanda, is this sort of a show of unity after all this talk about Pritzker running?
I mean, I don't think that the talk of Pritzker having his sights set on higher horizons is going to leave. And that's in part why he wants to play nice. And let's be clear, he has always done so. He is a very, very wealthy man, longtime Democrat, so this is nothing new for him. He did get singled out for praise by the president during this closed-door event, saying that that Pritzker did more than almost anybody in the country to get Biden elected president in 2020. So it is, I think, yes, it is a show of unity. It is also Biden needs money. Chicago's hosting the DNC. Pritzker wants more, and this is a natural role for him. It is all of that.
How many times has Chicago been called the flyover ATM for pretty much all campaigns and both parties?
Flyover ATM. That's a good one.
It basically is.
I have not heard that, but I have today. Heather, you reported on a city council hearing about the migrant crisis today. 600 migrants living in police stations, 5,000 in city shelters. What is happening with the 5 new proposed centers?
Well, the city needs to get those people who are living on the floors of these police stations out of there. And I think it's important to note that this is 2 months after this crisis really began, and that many people are still unhoused in Chicago, I think is truly a crisis, and it is a significant problem for Mayor Brandon Johnson's administration. They promised today that they are developing a comprehensive plan that will open more shelters and that will sort of standardize the process when people arrive in Chicago to get them services, to get them somewhere to live. But it is very hard to find permanent housing for these recent immigrants. They don't have money. They can't work, most of them. So that means that fewer than 1,000 people of the 11,000 people who have arrived since August have moved into permanent homes. And that shows you the scope of the crisis.
May I add that this is something that the governor was asked previously this week, are you going to talk about that when the president is here? Money for the migrant crisis. And he said, yes, every time I have the chance, I have before, I will again. It did not come up, however, in Biden's prepared remarks for this campaign event. It was not part of the Bidenomics big campaign speech. So hopefully there was some talk there, but there really has not been an indication that the feds are anytime soon going to be swooping in with additional cash or aid to move this along.
Can I just say, that's why it's a bummer that there's no Q&A from reporters when the president's in town. This is questions that reporters have. It's not just the cash, but it's Biden perhaps issuing an executive order that would lift work permit requirements for folks that are seeking asylum right now that cannot legally work. We don't know.
Along the border.
We don't know what the president really thinks about that, other than Congress people have begged him for some kind of action. So like you said, maybe at that fundraiser they talked about it, but it seemed like they were just kind of talking about politics and races and money.
So let's shift gears a little bit. See what I did there? Talk about the NASCAR race this weekend. But Paris holiday weekends are usually rife with safety issues. How are first responders going to deal with emergencies around the NASCAR event? And will neighborhood coverage lag?
Well, they might have to put the brakes on some of their normal patrol duties
We could do this all day.
in other neighborhoods. You know, if Chicago's good at one thing, it knows how to host these big events. NATO, G7, G8, G6, whatever the number was. Whatever the number was, I think Russia was a part of it back then. The city knows how to pull these things off. What happens is, as we mentioned earlier, officers are overworked. They're working, you know, through their holiday shifts and overtime to be able to do this and leave resources for the neighborhoods, because without NASCAR, this is typically one of the roughest weekends of the year in terms of crime.
Almost out of time. Amanda, Governor Pritzker skipping it. Is he sending a message? He's not coming to NASCAR?
I don't think so. In this case, he said that he had plans long before NASCAR was there. He's a busy guy. He had plans. So I don't think we need to make a mountain out of a molehill with that one.
Okay, good to know.
Held myself back from any sort of NASCAR pun.
We appreciate it. All right, that's spotlight. That's Spotlit. We spotlit all the important things we need to talk about it in Spotlight Politics. Heather Sharon, Paris Schutz, Amanda Vinicky. Thanks. Up next, a Cubs player teams up with an artist for an insider's view of Wrigley Field. But first, a look at the weather.
An unusual friendship is resulting in some artwork with a home field advantage. Chicago Cubs outfielder Ian Happ commissioned an artist to capture the game from a player's perspective. But the artist, an Englishman, didn't know much about baseball, so Happ introduced his friend to his workplace. Here's Mark Vitale with that story.
Happ drives one in the air, pretty well hit deep left center. It's got a chance. Gone.
I had this experience where I would bring people down on the field that had been to 10, 20, 100 games at Wrigley Field, and they would get on the field and look back up and have this experience or this moment of awe. And to be able to capture that and some of the different perspectives that we get of Wrigley Field as players that the fans don't get. The first one was from the dugout, looking out as the fans are experiencing it from a different point of view. So that's how it started, and then we captured the batter's box view and then that kind of rounding third after a home run.
The artist Ian Happ hired, Patrick Vale, also made cityscapes and portraits of fans he's met. Vale was born in Bristol, England, and lives in Brooklyn.
I went to a Mets game and I'm always drawing wherever I go, and I did a little sketch in my sketchbook, and then I think you saw that and you're like, oh, hang on a minute, we need to get you out to Wrigley.
Vale met Happ through a mutual friend. He understood cricket, but not baseball.
Yeah, I haven't got the foggiest, or I didn't. I'm learning. You know, I mean, it's a field. I think to start with, I would call it a pitch, and Ian would pick me up on all of those little things.
Their 5-year partnership resulted in a gallery show called See What I See.
We love artwork that has a story behind it. This kind of collaboration has not been seen before.
Happ hit a pair of home runs at the first Cubs game in London. But to this product of Western Pennsylvania, there's no place like his adopted home, and a ballpark steeped in history that strikes him in different ways.
One of the most powerful ways is the people that have played here before us, you know, the Ernie Banks, the Ron Santos. Babe Ruth called a shot here, you know, to conceptualize that and to the history, the 100+ years of history at this field, and to have the opportunity to continue that on to wear the Cubs uniform is really special as a player, and then the energy that you get from the fan base. They're always here, they're always rooting for you, and they're such a positive fan base, which is so impressive.
He's glad to share Wrigley with his friend, but the artist has yet to take batting practice.
Are you teaching him how to hit it fastball?
I don't know if that's
No, we haven't got him out to take BP yet. That's something we'll have to do.
Happ will sprint into second.
And while neither the ball player nor the artist is from Chicago, each has found the city welcoming.
It's just been wonderful. Like, I'm starting to explore the city myself now through the lens of baseball and people that I meet and interview at the Cubs. I feel like I'm a bit of a detective of sorts, you know, trying to learn those stories about why people love this club so much and the city.
And just to be able to give the people that watch us and cheer for us every day kind of a look into how it is for us. We're excited to share it with everybody. It's been a long time coming.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
What a cool project. The art show is at Gallery Victor in River West and runs through August 26. Artist Patrick Vale is in residence at the gallery through July, and Ian Happ plays tonight at Wrigley Field. You know, he's got another job here. Find out more about this show on our website.
Hopefully they can breathe okay out
The
at
Cubs are
Wrigley
in
tonight.
contention here, you know? Oh, yeah, hopefully they
then
can
there's
breathe.
that. And that is our show for Wednesday night. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. We're making a pit stop downtown with a live report on the NASCAR race ahead of this weekend.
They just keep coming, and we break down the latest decisions out of the U.S. Supreme Court. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to recognize its 18 attorneys selected for the 2023 Super Lawyers List.